Good morning and welcome to Rising. Happy New Year. Hope you enjoyed our new set design and our new music, which I'd love to talk about more, but unfortunately we have to begin the day with a rather somber story. Good morning, Niall.
Morning, Robby. Yeah, absolutely. Happy New Year to you too, but a not very happy news agenda today. So start us off. What is on your radar?
Well, we begin the year, unfortunately, on a very grim note with twin acts of violence, one clearly terrorism, the other possibly terrorism, occurring in New Orleans and in Las Vegas. First, let's look at New Orleans, where at least 15 people are dead following a despicable act of mass murder. A man identified as 42-year-old Shamsuddin Bahar Jabbar allegedly drove a rented vehicle down Bourbon Street, popular tourist destination in the French Quarter of the city, deliberately striking numerous people around 3:15 a.m. Bourbon Street is typically closed to vehicles. It's an area where pedestrians can walk in the street itself, visiting shops and restaurants on foot. But Jabbar drove around a police barricade in order to carry out his attack. He had weapons, possibly explosives, and did engage police in a brief exchange of gunfire before they shot him dead. Now, Bourbon Street typically has additional security measures in place, but local law enforcement said those extra barricades were being repaired at the time. Now, there will certainly be time later to scrutinize whether an oversight by authorities contributed to the deadliness of this attack, though we shouldn't jump to conclusions on that front. For now, however, it's fair to say that the three officers who acted quickly to neutralize the killer are heroes, brought this rampage to an end, and undoubtedly saved additional lives. Now, the suspect, Jabbar, is dead, but the FBI believes he may not have been working alone. That's not confirmed yet. Additional suspects could still be at large. It's cause for serious concern as New Orleans will be hosting the Sugar Bowl later today. The game was initially delayed for 24 hours due to the attack. Jabbar had in his possession the flag of ISIS, the Islamic terrorist group, that has called on its supporters to commit acts of violence against Americans. President Joe Biden has said there's no question that he was inspired by the Islamic State. Let's watch the president's remarks.
The FBI for working non-stop to investigate this heinous act. The FBI is leading the investigation to determine what happened, why it happened, and whether there was any continuing threat to public safety. Here's what we know so far. The FBI has reported to me the killer was an American citizen, born in Texas. He served in the United States Army on active duty for many years. He also served in the Army Reserve until a few years ago. The FBI also reported to me that mere hours before the attack, he posted videos on social media indicating that he was inspired by ISIS, expressing a desire to kill. The ISIS flag was found in his vehicle, which he rented to conduct this attack. Possible explosives were found in the vehicle as well, and more explosives were found nearby.
As Biden said, Jabbar is indeed an American citizen who served in the military and lived in Texas. According to additional media reports, he had converted to Islam in recent years. He's been married and divorced twice. The husband of his ex-wife told reporters Jabbar had recently become erratic and the couple had stopped permitting him to see his two teenage daughters. The New York Times claims that he had recently moved into a heavily Muslim neighborhood in Houston, and he may have also been in financial trouble. CNN has reported that he made videos in which he discussed plans to murder his entire family, but then he had dreamt he was instructed to join ISIS instead. The vehicle he used to carry out the attack was rented from an online car rental service called Turo. That detail is actually quite important for reasons we'll explain in a moment. Now we turn to a separate incident, which was thankfully much less deadly but still quite shocking. A Tesla cybertruck exploded outside the Trump Hotel in Las Vegas around 7 a.m. yesterday. The only person killed was the driver, though several other people suffered minor injuries. Elon Musk, owner of Tesla, confirmed on X that the explosion was caused not by the vehicle itself malfunctioning, but because of a large firework or explosive device inside the truck. Get this, the truck was also rented using Turo, just like the vehicle used in the New Orleans attack. That could be a coincidence. It's a popular rental app, but right now that strikes some people as implausible. The American people are undoubtedly feeling a great deal of fear right now. Were these attacks linked, and are additional perpetrators, additional terrorists, still at large? Now is not the time for wild speculation. It's the time for top national law enforcement agencies, the FBI foremost among them, to get to work, neutralize any threat that remains. The federal government is, of course, in a transitional phase right now, with President-elect Donald Trump's choices for key positions, Kash Patel at FBI, Pete Hegseth at Defense, Kristi Noem at Homeland Security, awaiting confirmation. Trump campaign advisor Alex Brusiewicz writes on X that there's absolutely no time for political games or delays. Indeed, it is time to get to work. So we have these two incidents, the horrifying scene in New Orleans on Bourbon Street, a place I've visited in the past, a really fun, exciting tourist destination, heart of the city, playing host to this just awful, appalling crime, 15 people dead. And then we don't know at this time whether it is connected to the Las Vegas truck explosion. They did not find ISIS paraphernalia there so far, so we don't know, but the rental car app. Now, that could be a coincidence. If this is an app that lets you, instead of going through Hertz or Enterprise or a car rental service, this lets people like Uber DIY their own car rent. They can rent out their own personal vehicle to people. So if you're using that, this is a popular service to do that. So it could be a coincidence. It's bad PR for the company, or they could be linked. I think we're just still waiting to see.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is, obviously, it's a tragic event, well, two tragic events. We don't know about the linkage, if there is any. 15 people dead, at least in New Orleans. Sadly, I have seen reports that that death toll could rise. Obviously, a horrific event. There has been a history over more than 10 years now of these mass killings that have some Islamist component. Fort Hood back in 2009, there was the San Bernardino case, you may remember,
yes,
where a husband and wife killed 14 people, and then the Pulse nightclub shooting where the killer seemed
yes,
to have a whole confluence of influences, but one of them was that he thought that the Western lifestyle was filthy and expressed some fondness for ISIS. So that is all very bleak, very depressing stuff. You're right about obviously the commonality of the use of the app is something that arouses suspicion but isn't dispositive of anything. Now, you quoted the Trump spokesperson talking about political games. I do think we have to say that Trump himself on Truth Social talked about the fact, or tried to cast this as a byproduct of lax border security or of migration, which it isn't. He was complaining that, and this is the quote, "When I said that the criminals coming in are far worse than the criminals we have in our own country, that statement was constantly refuted by Democrats and the fake news media, but it turned out to be true." It didn't turn out to be true in this case. This man was born and raised in Beaumont, Texas, had served in the US Army, had always been, as far as we know, a US citizen. So that attempt to shoehorn this very tragic case into that framework just isn't factual.
Sure. He's an American citizen. This is not a case of importing in some terrorist person. Now, as we probe his ideology and his motivations, I think it's fair to say that the success, unfortunately, the dark success ISIS has had in inspiring people, like you noted, to commit, who are Americans, but to subscribe to that ideology and commit violence here is something I think we should take seriously and discuss strategies to combat. The ideology being something that is seeping into the country. But you're right to note, and Trump should not have said, that it was the person himself. Now, we don't know if his military experience could have played into this. Clearly mental disturbance on some level, given the erratic behavior, the, again, desire to kill the divorced ex-wife, and then he has a dream that he should join ISIS instead. So there will be a mental illness component and a terrorism component that needs to be investigated further. I've also seen some harping on the barricades not being present on Bourbon Street, which definitely look into whether that was a mistake that was made. However, if somebody's determined to drive over a bunch of people in a car, I mean, we can't barricade their streets are literally for cars, not Bourbon Street, but
right. No, exactly.
He could have done this in any other way, so I'm hesitant to jump into the how dare they not have the barricades up kind of argument.
No, absolutely. I mean, if there were egregious failures in this case, then certainly those are worth probing. But like you, a free society is by its nature a vulnerable society to some degree. In order to create a completely, as it were, terrorism-proof society, you would have to sacrifice freedoms that the vast majority of us do not want to sacrifice.
Which is exactly what they want.
Right.
Islamic extremists, ISIS, wants us to overreact. Al-Qaeda wanted this, Osama bin Laden wanted this, us to overreact. And I mean, the contempt they have for the relative freedom we live in, which is not the only motivator of their attacks. They're also upset about the U.S. interventions into Middle Eastern countries. But to overreact and to create a police state would be a success for the terrorists. We cannot let them win, and we cannot do that. So I very much agree about being cautious and not unduly threatening civil liberties as we explore ways to keep us all safer in the new year.
Which I think is also why there's merits in going ahead with the Sugar Bowl, albeit 24 hours later than it was scheduled to be.
Yes, indeed. More Rising coming up next. Please stay with us. There's no doubt that the Secret Service has faced plenty of criticism after 2 assassination attempts on President-elect Donald Trump during the campaign. The first was in July at a rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. The second in September at the Trump International Golf Club in Florida. These security lapses were likely due to long-running problems. New reporting from the Washington Post has found the number of Secret Service members with 5 years of experience or less makes up nearly 30% of the agency, while in 2015 they made up only 13%.
10 years ago, a White House-commissioned investigation into the Secret Service suggested that the best agents should spend at least 25% of their time training on the job. But the Washington Post found that agents are training only 3 to 7% of the time. The investigation also recommended appointing an outsider to lead the Secret Service. All 3 presidents since then, Presidents Obama, Trump, and Biden, ultimately ignored this, or at least didn't act on that recommendation. Trump did at first choose an outsider during his term, but he fired him in 2019.
Anthony Guglielmini, a Secret Service spokesperson, said that a lack of resources and funding prevented the agency from adopting all the recommendations. He cited a lack of resources and of funding. And Max Stier, the president of a nonprofit group called Partnership for Public Service, which focuses on improving management of the federal government, has told the Post that Secret Service members have low morale and are burned out from the lack of reforms and reinforcements. Stier says many agents have ranked the Secret Service as the worst place to work in the federal government. Former Secret Service agent Dan Bongino took to X, reacting to this report, and wrote, "Fix this or someone is going to get killed." Yes, the numerous failures of the Secret Service on full display, particularly with the Butler, Pennsylvania attempt on Trump's life, in which he was actually wounded by gunfire. Another person was killed, and I think a third person seriously injured by a gunman on a rooftop that should have been in the secure perimeter. If that, they said, well, that was outside the perimeter. But if it's easy for an amateur to get off such a shot to hit the president from that distance, then you have to have that be part of the secure perimeter. They were themselves on a roof, so the argument that you couldn't be on that roof made no sense. The people who did take out the shooter, he was spotted by bystanders, he was engaged with by local police, but that message was not transmitted to the detail fast enough. There just seemed to be a tremendous lack of acting with sufficient vigor, given the knowledge they had of a suspicious person on a roof.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think anyone with any basic knowledge of security would see it as a major failure that the shooter in the Butler, Pennsylvania instance had a clear line of sight to the President of the United States speaking in the open air. It just seems like that shouldn't happen.
Yes.
The Washington Post report that we're referring to links that to some degree to these failures of the Secret Service or vulnerabilities within the Secret Service, because that report notes that the person in charge of planning for the Secret Service would typically be expected to have at least 7 years of experience overall. The person who did it in this instance had 4 years of experience. Now, the rebuttal to that would be you shouldn't need all that much experience to know that that situation wasn't secure. But nonetheless, it seems to be this point through which we can sort of extrapolate that there are these other failures to do with a move toward less experienced agents, people leaving the agency. Something I didn't know until I read the Washington Post report was at one time, recently, the Secret Service was offering $25,000 retention bonuses to people who wouldn't leave because so many people were leaving. So if you just hung around, you'd get 25 grand. That does suggest a pretty serious morale problem. It's not necessarily a funding problem. Funding for the Secret Service, according to the Post, has risen from 2.3 billion in 2017 to 3.1 billion now. So that's a significant increase. They do point out, to be fair, that the number of Secret Service details has expanded quite significantly.
Sure, as it becomes more necessary to protect a greater number of people. I remember the RFK Jr.'s lack of receiving Secret Service protection was something he frequently complained about, to my mind, not without some cause, given how high profile an individual he was.
Well, and the family, the tragic family history, yeah.
Right, exactly, yeah. So the determination not to do that seemed suspicious to me, although if they're dealing with a finite pool of resources and, can't even guarantee the actual presence. And then it was so at his golf course that they weren't, checking that a little bit more, or that somebody could be there in the bushes, knowing from the cell phone signal that there's someone hiding in the bushes for hours and hours and hours. He was there. It seems very worrisome, but I don't know, maybe we're entering a new modern era where it's going to be harder and harder to protect important people from threats.
I think that's possibly the case. I mean, certainly the level of hostility in our politics now does seem to me to create an increased threat of actual attacks, unfortunately. Sure. Having said that, I mean, these problems with the Secret Service have been going on at least a decade. In reading the Post story, I was reminded of how embarrassing some of the failures were during the Obama era, where a guy literally jumped the fence at the White House and went in the front door of the building, of the White House itself, and eventually was apprehended, but there were all sorts of weird failures there, including a Secret Service agent who was armed but just didn't know what to do because he didn't know if he was permitted to shoot within the White House itself. All of these things are part of this picture where it seems a very troubled agency. Obviously, the director did resign following the Butler assassination attempt, Kimberly Cheadle. So it's a very worrisome picture.
Right, and the extent to which this corresponds to heated rhetoric or a very divided times in our politics is, not even totally completely clear. We had two presidents actually assassinated in 1870 and 1900, political violence all across all of Europe, with numerous heads of states assassinated, eventually leading to World War I. That was not a time of incredible, unique partisan political difference, and the 60s and 70s saw an extreme amount of ideologically motivated violence, and I don't know if you want to say that was a more incendiary time than now. The 60s certainly, maybe not so much the 70s.
No, and also I wonder, without getting too deep into the weeds of that, 63 was JFK, and I don't think at that stage the sort of tumult of the 60s was really in full effect in the same way. There were all sorts of theories, and it's one of the happenings in American history that I think the phrase conspiracy theory is wrongly applied to. A majority of Americans have never believed that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone in that instance. But nevertheless, it wasn't. I mean, I think you could make the argument in say, 68 when RFK
and MLK
were killed, that it was more a product of very inflammatory times.
Well, we will continue to monitor that. No doubt the Secret Service has a lot of questions to answer about recent failures. Still to come, more on Rising Today. Please stay with us. President-elect Donald Trump may have unequivocally endorsed Congressman Mike Johnson to keep his speakership, but some Republicans are still not done trying to oust him. Kentucky Senator Rand Paul, for instance, tweeted yesterday, as Congress debates re-electing the accidental Speaker Mike Johnson, conservatives across the country should remember that Speaker Mike cast the deciding vote to allow a secret court, FISA, to search American records without a warrant and to send $60 billion to Ukraine. Pathetic. Kentucky Congressman Thomas Massie has long fought Johnson's role as Speaker. Here's a recent tweet from him. For months, Democrats ignored the fact that Joe Biden was a potato. They convinced themselves that keeping him around was the pragmatic way to win the day. Too late did they admit the emperor had no clothes. Republicans are doing the same thing by keeping Speaker Mike Johnson.
Other Republicans are pushing back, though. New York Congressman Mike Lawler went on CNN last week to make the case for Johnson. Here he is.
You cannot do anything until you elect a speaker. So, from my vantage point, that would be the height of stupidity to get into a protracted speaker battle. Mike Johnson won the vote within the conference to serve another term as speaker. He has worked tirelessly to help give us this majority.
Former House Speaker Newt Gingrich also voiced his frustration with anti-Johnson Republicans this week. I do not understand what the contrarian House Republicans think they will gain by opposing Speaker Mike Johnson. They have no one who can get more votes. They risk crippling President Trump's electoral win on January the 6th. They are, in effect, allies of the Democrats. I challenge them to explain what their end game is other than noise, Gingrich wrote. The vote will take place Friday as the new Congress gets underway. So, Robby, what do you make of all this? I mean, Thomas Massie and Rand Paul would be fairly closely aligned with your views,
yes,
I
indeed.
would imagine. They obviously have a serious objection to Speaker Johnson, as he still is for the moment. He will seek re-election again. But basically because of spending and the FISA authorization or reauthorization. But it doesn't seem like they have a whole lot of votes. Of course, Johnson doesn't have much room for maneuver.
Doesn't take a whole lot
No,
of
it
votes, and obviously Rand Paul is not in the House, so
Right.
his is just an ideological objection.
Yeah.
These are two figures who I value quite a bit. I would say that Massie speaks for a lot of Republican primary voters, at least, a lot of people out there who have called on Congress, their Republican coalition, to do more on just those issues you raised, on Ukraine funding, for one thing, on FISA courts. I mean, Donald Trump himself, the Republican leadership, has become more aware of how these policies that I would argue violate our civil liberties can be weaponized against them, and ran on doing something about it, and have a speaker who's just kind of, the argument is part of the establishment. Again, why did you ask Kevin McCarthy to replace him with someone who has the exact same policies as Kevin McCarthy? And this happens over and over again. It's the endless cycle of, from Boehner to Ryan to McCarthy, now to Johnson, of people like Massie agitating for someone who is going to reflect actual conservative priorities. A person makes promises, they think they will do that, gets into the speaker position, and then does the exact same things as the previous speaker. So it might make you just resign to having governance that is not according to the will of Thomas Massie and the people who support him, unfortunately. But he's saying he has nothing to lose, why not try? Now, Trump is supporting Johnson, and this does show that there are sometimes differences within the MAGA category. Rand Paul and Thomas Massie have agreed with Trump and defended him on a lot, but they are more libertarian-minded, and they've occasionally criticized picks he's made or policies he's pursued, like tariffs and other things. This is another example of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have a slightly different view, though I see where that argument that you're making is coming from, or where it's rooted. There is also, as well as the Thomas Masseys and the Chip Roys and the Rand Pauls of the world, there are a certain number of Republican members of Congress who represent at least competitive districts, sometimes Democratic-leaning districts, and they quite understandably are not so eager as Thomas Massie might be to have somebody pursue an absolutely, I don't even mean dogmatic in the negative sense, but a very strongly fiscally conservative, strongly libertarian view. And those people have a right to have their views considered as well. The other point is, at the end of the day, as a matter of political reality, the government and the House has to work to some degree, to some rudimentary level. And so I think the danger of a kind of a Chip Roy, Thomas Massie kind of approach is that the whole thing just seizes up because they say, no, we're not going along with this. They've absolutely the right to do that, but then does government shut down? Do you end up in a situation of default? All of those potentially baleful consequences.
But let's not forget that over the past 10 years or so, the way the House operates has changed dramatically to favor the Speaker's power above all else. Individual members were lost for a long time the ability to bring their own amendments to the floor without the approval of the Speaker. Justin Amash, a former congressman who I quite like, we've interviewed on Rising a few times, has explained from a procedural standpoint the work of the House has just ground to a halt. You no longer have issues being debated and then voted on by the chamber. Things only get to the voting part. They only get to the floor if they have the Speaker's blessing. And that prevents robust and healthy debate taking place on a variety of issues. It ends up being an all or nothing thing, and that is unhealthy for democracy. It's not functioning the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's completely a fair point, and I think it is a part of a broader picture of centralization of power among party leaders.
The point being, if the Speaker is going to wield dictatorial, consistent with the norms of the body, but if it's all going to be policy done by the Speaker, well, then it should be someone in line with the actual agenda they were elected to implement. You could maybe you can have a Speaker whose views are a little bit more centrist leaning in the Republican coalition. If it's still, well, everybody can bring whatever they want to the floor and we'll debate and discuss it. But if it all has to go through him, having someone who's at odds with a significant chunk of the base, not ideal.
No, but I mean, is it really fair, though, to say that Mike Johnson is at odds with a significant chunk of the base? Like, Mike Johnson's a pretty conservative guy. Now, he has made the decision that government has to be kept open, and therefore he has made deals that displease some people on the most fiscally hawkish level. But, this isn't, Mitt Romney we're talking about here. I mean, this is somebody who is, particularly in the social realm, very conservative views.
Well, he's very socially conservative, sure. He's also ardently, if not neoconservative, like Mitch McConnell, seems to have a lot of funding priorities for our friends and allies across the world, which I would say is no longer the biggest priority of MAGA, and in fact there's some pushback in MAGA to having that be the way we do business. Obviously, there's disagreement in the Republican coalition on what makes you conservative. Does that mean some more Bush-era conservatives would say, no, it is conservative, it's very right-leaning to support robustly funding a country under attack by Russia, and there are other people saying, no, that's selling out America first, that's not conservative at all, that's something rhinos and liberal Democrats want to do. So it's it's just a debate. Yes. Yeah. But he fits he would be it would not be controversial to say he's very conservative by the standards of 10 years ago. But the party's changed. No,
the party definitely has changed. I do think that the main problem the dissenters face is it's not obvious who they would put up who could command the support of the Republican conference.
Yeah. Well, it's not obvious that anyone can command the entire support
not Mike Johnson
of everyone. Stick around, more to come today on Rising. More mayhem on the New York City subway. On New Year's Eve, a man was pushed in front of a moving train at a downtown stop. That man has survived and is in stable but very serious condition. We're going to watch what happened. I'll warn you, it is not graphic, but it is disturbing, so don't watch if you don't want to, but here it is. Now, 45-year-old Joseph Linsky did suffer critical injuries and a fractured skull as a result of that attack. A ruptured spleen, 4 broken ribs as well. It's all according to court records filed on Wednesday.
The police caught the person accused of attacking Linsky. He is 23-year-old Kamel Hawkins. The suspect was charged with attempted murder in the 2nd degree and 4 counts of assault. According to the New York Times, Hawkins had a series of previous arrests that include violent offences. The Times also reports that he, quote, has an open case in Brooklyn Criminal Court, where he is facing harassment and assault charges for throwing bleach on a woman and trying to kick down her door, according to a criminal complaint. His father told the Times that he had recently become worried about his son's mental health and wondered if excessive marijuana use was to blame. As for the victim, according to law enforcement officials, Linsky survived because he fell next to the train, not under it. This incident comes just 1 week after a 61-year-old woman was set on fire in a New York City subway car, subsequently dying. And it was just weeks ago that Daniel Penny was found not guilty of criminally negligent homicide in the death of Jordan Neely, after Penny placed Neely in a chokehold on a subway car in May of 2023.
Really disturbing stuff. I'm sure a lot of people who live in New York watching that footage are saying to themselves, well, that could have been me on any morning on any day. He's just standing, waiting for the train. This is very deliberate. The person who did it knew exactly what they were doing, waited until the train was almost there. It's a second before the train arrives. I gather that the driver of the train reacted fast enough to slow it down. I mean, it was like with a second to go. So the person has actually survived, but is grievously wounded. Really awful stuff. Now, they caught the guy. Some evidence he's psychotic, but he also has numerous other arrest situations for other violence. And I'm sure there are a lot of people saying, how many, with the idea that people just released over and over again, why is the criminal justice system not doing a better job of keeping people off the streets who are psychotic and have a predilection toward violence, have engaged in violence?
So that's true. It is, I think, for a start, the kind of nightmare of anyone who's ever lived in New York to have that kind of experience. When I first came to the US, I lived in New York for 8 years, and everyone who has lived in New York, used the subway, there's always that worry about somebody pushing or doing something violent when it comes into that. In relation to the accused here, Mr. Hawkins, it's not clear to me what he has been previously convicted of as opposed to previously arrested for. And so obviously there's a question of whether has he been treated leniently or has he simply not been found guilty of some of these things. I think that's the question. But also, you mentioned the point about psychotic people or people who are mentally troubled. And I'm just curious what you think about that from your libertarian perspective, because Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York, talks about the fact that she is backing a bill that would make it easier, in essence, to sequester or to hold people against their will on the basis that they are mentally ill. I understand the impulse or the reason why that is done. On the other hand, it is the state removing someone's liberty when that person has not committed a crime. So do you not have any problem with that?
Well, I do have some problem with it, but the reality is we just need to do more on this front. No one should be sentenced without being convicted of some crime, but I would say that bail being granted a little too easily in some of these cases seems to be what's going on here. I think there should be if this is you've had multiple infractions now run-ins in with law enforcement and are awaiting prosecution, maybe you don't just get automatically released in the meantime to go commit more violence. You have to be, you're right, can't be sentenced
but he has to be
being
convicted, Robbie, though. That's the question.
If you're a danger, you can be held prior to trial, right? You don't have to be, or they set your bail at a very high amount, and if you can't pay it, you got to remain. In a lot of these cases, these people are just released no bail at all, and that's the trouble. I also think that people who are obviously psychotically ill from drug addiction and mental illness, well, yes, I worry about the slippery slope of that. It is so, those people are in such a category by themselves. If we were starting to lock up everyone who kind of looks at you funny, I would agree that that's very dangerous and we should be vigilantly on the lookout for that. But you and I could walk around D.C. or New York and we would not disagree, spotting the individuals who are suffering extreme psychosis, and we would not disagree on, we wouldn't like, oh, that's a borderline case, we're not sure. It is obvious who these people are and that they need help, and they do need to be sequestered, and they need to take medicine.
I find myself in the unusual position of being slightly more libertarian than you are on this question, I think. It may be true that we wouldn't disagree on people who are displaying obvious signs of mental illness. What I have qualms about is the government locking those people away, in part because when you do that, it's not clear how the person regains their liberty. In other words, who decides when they're well enough to be let out again? Obviously, there is a public interest in keeping people who are violent from committing acts of violence. But that seems to me a separate, if related, category from someone who is mentally ill, who may not obviously be violent.
Yes, I thought, my thinking is here we were specifically discussing violent people. Look, if you are having a mental health episode but you otherwise have living arrangements and you are in a home and you're not in a public place, I don't. I mean,
Yeah, but
there
look,
isn't,
I mean,
yes, a role for the state to necessarily do something, but we're talking about the public spaces where people are threatened by your behavior,
Right.
more so than just a discomfort at you muttering to yourself.
No, well, yeah, but that's true. But about, what, 500 yards from where we are sitting is Union Station in D.C. And for the audience that doesn't know, there are a number of people generally around Union Station, as there are in Penn Station in New York and elsewhere,
Yeah.
who are obviously mentally ill.
Yeah.
But do we lock them up because they're obviously mentally ill? That's where it
I mean,
gets
lock them
questionable
up
to me.
is a
Well, do we
a
take them
jump.
out of society?
Do we take them to a place and give them antipsychotic medicine and release them when they are better? I'm not so dead set against that. I wouldn't send them to a prison.
Right.
You know, liberals talk about wanting more money for mental health instead of criminal justice type stuff. Fine, rehabilitation clinic, whatever you want to call it. But if we're not going to do anything about, if we're not going to police the public space enough to prevent pathological, antisocial, discomforting behavior happening there,
Yeah.
then this would be the other option. I am not comfortable saying we can just turn our public spaces over to people who are behaving in this way, that we just have to live with that and it's better for them. It doesn't actually seem better for them to me to let them writhe in filth and misery.
Well, that may be true. I mean, first of all, the idea that we're going to take them away and take them off the streets and they'll become better. Like, sadly, some people don't really become better from certain forms of mental illness, schizophrenia,
Some people don't.
other issues. So that in itself is a problem. The other thing, I think the broader thing...
Some people don't, but a lot of them will dramatically improve if
Yeah.
they're taking antipsychotic medicine
Yeah.
and if they're getting off drugs. There will be a marked improvement.
No, that's true. But I'm just, and this is where our usual rules are reversed, I'm highly skeptical of authorizing the government to remove liberty from people who have not actually done anything wrong except talk to themselves or display symptoms of mental illness.
Yeah, I mean, yes, if in the vast majority of cases that was all it is, then I might agree with you. But I would also say that, well, Union Station can just set a rule that you can't come in here, you know, with your clothes falling in rags with your clothes falling off, and if you do, the security guards are going to throw you out. So then we're going to have enforcement that way. If we don't want to do enforcement that way, then we might start saying, oh, some of these people have to be moved into rehabilitation, so it's not like this.
Yeah, I mean,
It's a difficult. I mean, it's a difficult problem to solve.
I think
know.
mental illness generally is genuinely a philosophically very difficult problem to grapple with, because there is, of course, a public interest in ensuring safety and order and all the rest of it. And there are also rights that an individual has, even if that individual is mentally ill.
Well, I just end up arguing with liberals on and I'm not sure you're in this category, who are the housing first people who are like, oh, what we got to do is just give them housing. I'm like, but if there's no effort being used to address the mental illness and drug addiction, you could give them a mansion. They'll wreck it and leave it in 5 seconds because they need to be where the drug dealers are. Or they need to be they are in the grips of something that is not solved by just we could give them housing. We have programs for that. They don't remain there. So stick around. Excuse me. We have more Rising coming up right after this. Surprise, surprise, Stacey Abrams is downplaying Donald Trump's election win, brushing off the margin that he won by.
The former Georgia gubernatorial candidate made the remarks during an interview with MSNBC's Chris Hayes. Take a listen.
We keep misremembering what happened in November. Yes, Donald Trump won the election, but this wasn't a landslide. It was an evenly divided nation. He got more people, but this was not this seismic shift where 58% of America said no. It was less than 50% of the electorate who said, this is what we want. Our responsibility is for decency to show those who stayed home, those who stayed silent, that there is a place for decency and a place for them. That's the work that has to be done next. Not trying to replicate the bad, but trying to amplify and make good an attractive opportunity, an attractive option, and a true choice.
The Cook Political Report, notably nonpartisan, says that Trump won the popular vote 49.8% compared to Harris's 48.3%.
Now, Trump clinched both the Electoral College and popular vote, but his victory has been labelled small by historical standards by PBS, and it was the fourth smallest since 1960. As a reminder, Trump did secure wins in all 7 critical battleground states. PBS notes that those wins were by, quote, particularly wide margins.
I mean, look, yeah, it was not a blowout landslide election akin to Reagan in 1984 or Nixon or Johnson or something like that. I think we're never going to see an election like that again in our lifetime. We're just too divided. It was not even as big a victory as probably you would say Obama in 2008. But he did win the popular vote, and he won all those states. He won them pretty narrowly because we are a closely divided country. Joe Biden also won them very narrowly last time. So at some point it's splitting hairs what kind of adjective you want to apply to the size of Donald Trump's win. By the standards we operate under now, it was an impressive win.
So let me stand up for Stacey Abrams in this one, as you might expect. Firstly, yes, Donald Trump won. He won clearly. He won the popular vote. It was his best performance in any of the 3 elections that he contested. But I think that Stacey Abrams' point, as I understand it, is the propensity to extrapolate into broad a fashion that there is the American people have decided that Donald Trump is who they want, whereas 49.9% of the people who voted decided that, and 48.4% decided he wasn't the person they wanted. It's a very, very small margin in the popular vote. Not in dispute at all. Nobody's saying he didn't win or anything of that nature. But Abrams' point to me is, let's not get carried away in what the, quote, will of the people is, when the will of the people is, in fact, very narrowly divided. The nation at large has not become MAGA nation with some Lyndon Johnson 1964 style majority. And so, that is a worthwhile point to make.
The will of the country was, albeit narrowly, we want to put Republicans in charge of our entire government, which is what they voted to do.
I mean,
And so here we are.
Here we are. It's true. But the whole point is, it
was nice to hear Stacey Abrams concede an election, which is not something she always does.
I knew that was going to come out.
Oh yeah, I don't care for her very much.
I suspected you wouldn't, which was one of the reasons I enjoy talking about her views with you. In 2018, I wouldn't defend what she did because she literally did say, "I won" and "we won," and she. Now there's a separate argument to be made about the methods that were used in Georgia to close polling locations in poor neighborhoods, for example. That's a separate point from saying I won an election which she lost.
Yes, but she remains in good standing with progressive news hosts like Chris Hayes. I'm not sure why you'd keep booking her when you've made your entire personality about election denial and the threat of the right to democracy because of the actions, the admittedly bad actions that I've criticized on any numerous occasions that Trump took in 2020. And now, the fight of democracy, Stacey Abrams.
The reason is that Stacey Abrams didn't incite a mob to try to overturn the result.
Right.
She argued that the result was fraudulent because of moves that Brian Kemp, her opponent, had made to strike people off voter rolls.
She also started I don't quite remember the details of it. We interviewed a reporter on the show about this maybe a year or two ago. Her organization that she created to sort of be an advocacy organization for, I think for election integrity type things and that stuff. There was some allegations of financial improprieties regarding it that we interviewed a reporter about. Not someone on the right, someone who's a progressive and was actually dissatisfied by the hiring of friends and type people to run it. So there was another. I
don't know anything about that particular element of the story. Presumably, she or the organization denied that. But I mean, if there is validity to those complaints, that's fair enough. I do think that one of the important points that she was making was she was arguing, if you watch the full interview with Hayes, for the Democratic Party making itself more appealing to voters and how it could best do that. And the question, in fact, was about whether decency was for losers and you win elections by appealing to people's worst instincts. And Stacey Abrams was arguing against that, utilizing the comparative narrowness of Trump's popular vote win to make that argument.
Yeah, you win by appealing to people's hopes and dreams and aspirations. I mean, I think Republicans agree with that, although they think the country has gone significantly off track and have made the case that Joe Biden has presided over disaster after disaster or failed to deliver on his promise to fix the economy and other subjects. I don't think that's being necessarily excessively negative. The world has gotten to be a less safe or secure seeming place in the last 4 years, and the American people did decide by clearer margins than just 50%. If you poll them about, for instance, immigration and the economy, their level of dissatisfaction with Joe Biden is very high, is approaching not just a clear majority, but a super majority of the American people.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. On the other hand, one could offer poll ratings where the advantage is with the Democrats on abortion and other things, for example. But I will still staunchly defend Stacey Abrams' reviews, partly just to annoy you, but that's how it goes.
Love being annoyed, Niall. Let's have more Rising right after this, after a quick break. Tell us what you think about Stacey Abrams on the scene, and we'll be back with more of the show in just a minute. Well, another Democrat has bent the knee to Donald Trump. This time it's D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser, who visited Trump at Mar-a-Lago.
The mayor posted a statement on X saying, quote, "Today, President Trump and I had a great meeting to discuss our shared priorities for the president's second term. President Trump and I both want Washington, D.C. to be the best, most beautiful city in the world, and we want the capital city to reflect the strength of our nation," end quote. Bowser has had a historically rocky relationship with Trump. The two tussled in 2020 over COVID policies and about Bowser's decision to stand up to the president over Black Lives Matter. In fact, Bowser ordered the city to create a Black Lives Matter plaza at the foot of the White House.
Now it seems that Bowser's changing her tune from even right before the election in November, when she said, yes, we're concerned that an unhinged president that's concerned about only his power might try to use the District of Columbia to make a point to cities across America. But now they're getting along, and that seems fine and appropriate. He's once again a resident of the great city of Washington, D.C., and I think it's fine and even good for people who disagree with him to visit with him here or in Mar-a-Lago or wherever, and make nice and discuss ways to, not suddenly agree on politics, but to make Trump welcome in D.C., to plan out the inauguration very safely. This is going to be a big event taking place here. We are at a time, always at a time, but especially after the violence in New Orleans, we're probably all on our mind is potential terrorism or just crazy people or whatever it is. And bad things did happen in January surrounding the Capitol, et cetera, 4 years ago. That was the fault of some of Trump's supporters.
Trump.
And Trump, and
Sure.
We want nothing like that to happen again. We don't want rioting or any kinds of those things. So there needs to be negotiations and discussions between the incoming president and the governance of the city.
Yeah, I mean, obviously people who are very opposed politically to Donald Trump recognize he's the president-elect, and that that it is in their interest to get along with him. Not to sidetrack us completely into the District of Columbia statehood debate, but it is particularly important for the mayor of DC because the federal government has such enormous power over what happens here, and it's not quite the same at all as, being mayor of DC is a very different office in that way to being, governor of Michigan or whatever. That's a whole different story. So, to the extent that common ground can be found, I'm not against it. I don't think anybody really is against it. Muriel Bowser and Donald Trump have massively different political ideologies, massively different political worldviews, but, there are genuine issues. Just as one example, Bowser is very and understandably concerned about the idea that if the federal workforce can continue to work from home, that has a detrimental effect on the economics of DC, because a lot of those people live in Virginia or Maryland in particular, and therefore there's a lapse or a lag in city.
Yes, well, it's been nice to have the traffic situation
Lighter.
not quite as bad as it used to be. This is having clearly a crippling effect on restaurants, for instance, that serve lunch or we're getting revenue from people going to lunch has been a big problem. It's a huge difficulty. It seems clear to me Trump, or at least many of Trump's people, want to have the federal employees coming back to work, at least more so. I'm saying, can we have some kind of compromise where it's not everybody's got to be in the office every single day again? People are capable of working from home to some degree, but what about 2 or 3 days a week or something like that?
And I think there is a related point where Trump and obviously Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy in particular are very committed to this idea of paring back the federal government generally. So I think there's...
And this is one way to do it.
Well,
got to come back to work, and if you don't want to, guess you can
That's
retire.
literally the argument, that is this push to bring people back to in-person working, a way of winnowing down the federal workforce. And I mean, I don't think it is unreasonable to expect people to work from an office a certain amount of time. We're quite comfortably past the pandemic at this point. We're all struggling with various colds and flus here for different reasons, but there's not actually the risk of COVID in the way that there once was. So in-person working doesn't seem bad.
And most people, there are exceptions, of course. Most people, it seems to me, are more productive from having to show up to an office at least some amount of the time. Collaborate with your coworkers like that. Obviously, we have to come into the studio every day because we do a show from the offices of The Hill and News Nation. Some people are very productive on their own and don't need to be troubled and don't need to come in. But I think for most people, it's good to come in more than just semi every now and then.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that one of the issues is we're all still living with various social consequences of the pandemic. Yeah. Now, you and I probably have different views of the measures that were taken during that time, but I don't think we disagree about the fact that there were profound implications for society over that period. And
one of the Mayor Muriel Bowser's pandemic policies were not my favorite. I remember the mask mandate finally going away and then being brought back the day after her birthday party. She waited to get done with her birthday party before we brought back that lovely little infringement.
I'm sure I put my mask on happily post Muriel's birthday party. It was not her birthday party, so I can't remember when that was.
Never been my favorite political figure, although the people who have run against her in the Democratic primary I would like even less, as they're well to her left, and so she might be, for my money, the best we could possibly have.
You weren't a big Marion Barry fan then, I'm assuming.
That's before my time, I think.
He's
a colorful character, is what I hear.
He was, in fact,
colorful and corrupt.
Not that I'm generally in the business of making recommendations to watch anything other than Rising, but one of my favorite political documentaries is a documentary called The 9 Lives of Marion Barry, which I think does give due coverage to all his many different facets, good and bad, because he did do some good things in the District of Columbia prior to his better publicized problems.
Sure, they did arrest and charge that city council member for bribery charges.
That's right.
The one who had also Trayon White, thank you, control room, who had previously said that the Jews control the weather. They actually arrested him from my apartment building.
Really?
And
was he? So he lives in your apartment building?
Yes, which is not the ward that he represents.
Right.
But he gave a statement. I thought this was hilarious. He said, they can't find any evidence that I bribed anybody. And then the reporter says, you're being charged with being bribed. No comment.
I love that. There is footage of him accepting. Well, I better.
Yes,
not.
It's pretty damning that he's was being bribed.
He pleads his innocence, and we accept that people are
innocent until proven guilty. Very much so. Thank you, Niall. More Rising right after this. Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts warned on Tuesday that judicial independence is under threat. His annual end-of-year report on the federal judiciary, Roberts wrote, within the past few years, elected officials from across the political spectrum have raised the specter of open disregard for federal court rulings. These dangerous suggestions, however sporadic, must be soundly rejected.
Roberts emphasized that though all administrations lose crucial decisions at one point or another, those decisions are still followed. He urged Americans to cherish the rule of law and ensure that it remain intact. In 2018, a federal judge ruled against then-President Donald Trump's policy that restricted migrant asylum seekers at the border. This prompted Trump to call the judge in question an Obama judge. Roberts leapt in to defend the judge and said that there are no such thing as, quote, Obama judges, Trump judges, Bush judges, or Clinton judges.
In 2023, some Democrats said the White House and FDA should ignore a U.S. District Court judge's ruling that the FDA's approval of the abortion drug mifepristone was unlawful. Among those Democrats were Oregon Senator Ron Wyden and New York Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Yeah, I agree with the Chief Justice. I think you should abide by decisions even if you don't like them, and sometimes they go one way and they go the other. The judges are not, even though Republicans have pretty comfortable control of the Supreme Court right now and for the foreseeable future, the justices do often cross the aisle to agree with someone who's not in their ideological coalition. A great number of the cases are decided like 9-0 or 8-1, so it's not our Supreme Court. While there's a lot of complaints about how partisan it has become, it remains by far the least partisan aspect of government. There still is a lot of working across the aisle and so on and so forth. We don't want to. I would not want to go back to what the Andrew Jackson era of when he famously said the Supreme Court has made their decision. Now let them enforce it. When they tried to stop his expansion into Native American territories, the Supreme Court should be the ultimate law of the land, and people need to abide by their decisions.
I agree with that, but one of the more interesting things about the remarks that Roberts made and the stories that have emerged since then is the idea that he's actually having a bit of a go at J.D. Vance, the Vice President-elect, because Ruth Marcus, who columnist for the Washington Post, was pointing out that there are at least 3 occasions since 2021 when Vance has said things that appear to suggest that Trump or Republicans could in fact defy Supreme Court judgments and that the Supreme Court would be guilty of a sort of overreach of power in various ways. Now that in itself seems interesting, given that there's a conservative majority on the Supreme Court at the moment, 6-3, and more recent judgments or rulings from the court have certainly, I think, been broadly favourable to the President-elect, the most obvious being the one that expanded or drew rather broadly the circumstances in which a president could be immune from criminal prosecution. So that part of it is interesting. There's another element of this report that Roberts issues where he talks about the rising threat to judges from violence and from intimidation. He very emphatically makes the differentiation between people having strong views about court rulings and people actually engaging in violence or threatening violence. According to him, the U.S. Marshal Service has identified 1,000 serious threats to judges in just the past 5 years, which is a pretty dispiriting statistic.
Yes, dispiriting. You have every right to criticize judicial rulings. You can protest, in a public space in front of the Supreme Court. You can even protest probably in the neighborhoods that they live in, although I don't particularly recommend visiting people at their homes to protest, but that has happened in the past and is consistent with the First Amendment as long as you're not actually going onto their property or harassing them, and that is fine and is the way it works. I didn't look at J.D. Vance's remarks too closely. I don't really, as you point out, there's really no need for Republicans to go to the Supreme Court right now. They're probably going to have mostly favorable decisions to them for the foreseeable future. Barack Obama, though, famously went after the Supreme Court rhetorically, denouncing many of their decisions that he didn't disagree with and accusing them of becoming too partisan, which drew rebuke from, I believe, from Alito at the time.
During the State of the Union.
It was during the State of the Union with them sitting there. But he has the right to do that, too, although a lot of people were not so pleased about the kind of lecturing way he chose to do it, the optics of it, but he has that right.
No, absolutely. I mean, a lot of these things do cut across partisan lines. When it comes to the threats issue, there is a man who is pleading not guilty, who is charged with attempted murder, having been found or apprehended armed close to the home of Brett Kavanaugh. soon after the Roe versus Wade ruling. One of the details that I had forgotten about until I read some of the reporting on Roberts' remarks was that Justice Amy Coney Barrett, apparently in September, noted or revealed that there was some public engagement she had been involved in where she had been encouraged to wear a protective vest, a bulletproof vest in layperson's terms. That obviously is not the kind of pressure that we want judges on the Supreme Court or any court to be labouring under. Very disturbing that we've reached that sort of a pitch, I think.
Yeah, certainly not. Although I don't know for sure, based on that report, that that's actually gotten any worse or better. I mean, there are new means of communication. You can't say that obviously the justices were not getting harassing emails back in the 19th century. I do wonder if they are actually facing more threats. There are judges who get attacked or victims of violence, even in a non-political sense, just for making decisions that go contrary to certain defendants. It happens every now and then. There was that video footage from maybe a year or two ago, I can't exactly remember when, of that judge being tackled by a defendant.
Right, who leapt across.
Yes, I recently saw that person had been sentenced, I think, for that act of violence. Yeah, we don't want to see anything of that nature.
No, we don't. And to your point about the historical patterns or trends or whether the trajectory has changed, Roberts in that report mentions a South Carolinian judge. I'm going from memory here, but I believe the judge was in South Carolina during the time when integration and segregation were such volatile issues. And this particular judge issued a number of rulings that were pro-integration or anti-segregation, had, literally a burning cross on his lawn kind of stuff. So this is not new in and of itself, that there are threats or threatening behavior toward justices. The implication of Roberts' remarks is that it is on the upswing. That number of threats that I mentioned would suggest that it is, and it certainly wouldn't be incongruous with the general issue of sort of greater political bitterness that we were talking about in an earlier segment of today's show.
We'll be back with more Rising right after this. Well, we hope you enjoyed 2024's New Year's Eve roast. No, we're not talking about the food. We're talking about comedian Whitney Cummings, who went after President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris on CNN's New Year's Eve live special with Anderson Cooper and Andy Cohen. Let's watch.
2024 election fried our brains. The Democrats couldn't hold a primary because they were too busy holding a body upright. Are we still rolling? Am I off?
Go for it.
It was amazing that the pro-choice party didn't give their voters one when it came to the presidential candidate. Kamala was forced on us so hard you'd think she was patented by Pfizer or Moderna, whichever one's. Oh, God. Andy just gave me a very scary look.
No!
Ooh, I had not seen this clip. You told me that I would like it.
It'd be much more in line with your views than mine. I'm surprised you weren't watching it on a loop as it went viral.
There seems to be a permission being given now to call out the just obvious fraud that was the Biden campaign, the lie being foisted on us that he was capable of doing this. Now people are kind of admitting and joking about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just interesting to see that on CNN. That was quite surprising. Also, I mean, Whitney Cummings she's one of those people in popular culture who, like, I know she exists, but I'm not sure if she's particularly conservative or not.
I'll be perfectly honest with you, I have no idea who that is. And
all I could find when I was looking to see what her political views are is that she seems to have an objection to sort of censorious attitudes generally.
Amen.
And particularly when it comes to the trans issue, she seems to have a particular objection to that being sort of banished or made taboo, to make any jokes about that.
Oh, look at the hectoring, scolding way that the Daily Beast described this. Comedian's wild conspiracy theory-filled roast shocks CNN hosts.
Yeah.
It's a comedian with conspiracy theory-filled.
Well,
guys, take a joke. Oh, God.
No, I mean, I read that Daily Beast thing, and it is a bit much. She did go on to make some references that even I didn't really understand, which I think do go to fairly questionable theories. Something about the guy, the would-be Trump assassin had no silverware in his house, and I needed to look that up. Apparently it's some suggestion that the house was scrubbed or wasn't, you know, and then she started talking about drones and all of that.
They had to remove the CIA mind control.
Exactly,
devices.
they had to, and the tinfoil, presumably.
Yes.
But there was, she also did have a go at CNN, to her credit. She made some crack about how she now plays 3,000-person concert halls, which is about the size of the viewership of CNN these days.
Well, good for Andy Cohen and Anderson Cooper
Yeah.
being good sports about it, although they're usually pretty.
Yeah, no, absolutely. They normally enjoy.
That was a liquor drinking.
Enjoy beverages on their New Year's Eve specials.
So do the rest of us. So
I don't. We haven't discussed this before. I don't drink at all. It's my one contribution to to ethnic stereotypes.
You're fighting the Irish ethnic stereotype.
Exactly. I'm fighting the slur. But anyway, you know, Whitney Cummings. Fair enough. I think it's good to have people on those kind of shows. Yes, New Year's Eve, it's all kind of fun, but it's nonetheless something a bit provocative, something a bit more shocking than you might, or startling maybe would be a better word, than you might expect to hear on CNN. I did notice, and I don't think we have the shot back there, Anderson Cooper was very helpfully you couldn't see his facial expression at all, because he had turned completely side on and was holding an umbrella, so it wasn't clear whether he was chuckling along with these
Andy Cohen was laughing, but
Andy Cohen enjoyed it, I think.
Anderson Cooper. Right, and they used to be they used to do this with Kathy Griffin, right? And then they decided no more Kathy Griffin after the
Trump's head.
The Trump head thing.
Yeah, which she then tried to martyr herself about. I was never a particular Kathy Griffin fan, even before the matter of Trump's head. And for the small number of our audience who might not know what we're referring to, she posed on a magazine cover, I think, with obviously not actually Donald Trump's head, but something made to appear like.
Yeah, it was really in bad taste. I mean, I oppose cancel culture, and she's a comedian, so I'm like, I not work myself up into some fervor being offended over this.
No, but
and you really shouldn't. But it was in bad taste.
No, it was, and I mean, obviously, you know, I have lots and lots of criticisms of Trump, but he was someone who lots of people were so fired up about that violence against him was a real possibility during his presidency. We then saw, obviously,
we have actually seen violence against him. Right. When you complain about political rhetoric, it suggests that it's in bad faith when you're very happily or easy for you to engage in a kind of thing like that. It makes it seem like it's not really a sincere criticism.
No,
the other side is saying this is a man who has actually faced tangible political violence, who was shot, who was almost killed. I mean, we moved past it because the news cycle goes so fast, and there's so many things happening, and you know, just yesterday there was this horrific attack in New Orleans that we'll be continuing to dig into. But it was this close to Trump being an actual victim of an assassination.
No, absolutely, and I've never made light of that. I was on air with our colleagues at News Nation when it happened, and it was so shocking in the moment. And you know, when it happened, people thought he might have been killed because he went down, and you had heard shots and all of that. It was a genuinely shocking event, and you know, I don't think there was some making light of it even in the immediate aftermath, particularly online, and I don't go for that at all.
Well, we are going into a new year here at Rising. We got some new stuff in the background. Let us know what you think about it. I think it looks definitely better, less purple and blue.
Fine art, not painted by either of us.
Not painted by us. This is a kind of impressionist style, is what
I think so.
Thinking. It's what did you say? Autumnal?
Yes, it is autumnal, I think, isn't it? I mean, we have lots of golden colors and all that. So it's all.
I'm being told it's oil painting. Very beautiful.
Oh, well, there we go.
Very pretty.
Nice. We like it.
Let us know what you think, and in the meantime, be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any of our content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're now available anywhere that you can find podcasts, and I will see you next week.